The white silence. The last thing I remember before the crash was the sound of metal screaming. The plane's wings tore through the frozen air like paper, and then nothing but white. When I opened my eyes, I was lying face down in the snow, surrounded by wreckage. The wind cut through me like knives. My body ached, my ears rang, and the world was nothing but silence. Cold, merciless, endless silence. I should have died that day. But sometimes life refuses to let go. They say the Arctic doesn't forgive. They're wrong. It doesn't care. Out here there's no God, no mercy, only survival. My name is Daniel Ward. I was part of a research expedition studying climate patterns in the far north. There were 8 of us on board. After the crash, I was the only one who walked away. At first, I thought help would come. It didn't. Days turned into weeks. The cold gnawed through my clothes, my sanity, my hope. The temperature dropped to 40 below, and the air itself burned like fire. I prayed for a sign, any sign, that I wasn't completely alone. And then, as if heaven had heard my dying wish, I saw it. A seal, fat and slow, basking near a hole in the ice. My salvation. But when I lunged toward it, the ground gave way, and I plunged into the black water. The cold was so sharp it felt like being stabbed. My right leg went numb instantly. Somehow I clawed my way out, gasping, half dead. The seal was gone, but the instinct to live hadn't left me. I remembered an old survival trick. I ripped open my last piece of cloth, soaked it in seal fat from the carcass I'd found earlier, and wrapped it tight around my frozen leg. Pain exploded through me, but it meant I could still feel. From that moment on, one word filled my mind like a drumbeat: home. Even if home was 4,000 kilometers away, I was going to make it. I began walking, counting steps to stay sane. Every 3,000 steps, I carved a mark into the snow with a bullet. Days blended into nights. I forgot what month it was. The sky was always gray, the world always white. Sometimes I talked to myself. Sometimes I thought I heard someone answering back. Loneliness became a voice of its own. After months of walking, I started seeing things that weren't there. Shapes in the snow, shadows that vanished when I blinked. The Arctic plays tricks on your mind. You begin to believe the silence has eyes. And then, one day, I saw something impossible. A tree. A single, leafless tree standing tall in the middle of the ice. I fell to my knees and laughed, or maybe cried. I couldn't tell the difference anymore. I wrapped my arms around its frozen trunk like it was the last living thing in the world. And for the first time in 6 months, I believed I might actually make it out. Not long after, the world began to change. The ice thinned, the wind softened. I reached the edge of the great white nothing and saw forest. Real forest. That night I built a fire. Its warmth felt like a memory, fragile, distant, but still alive. I closed my eyes and drifted into the deepest sleep I'd had in months. But peace never lasts long in places like this. When I woke, I wasn't alone. 2 men stood near the fire, rough, weathered faces, miners maybe. One of them introduced himself as Harlan, the other as Dexter. They said they'd seen my smoke from miles away. They offered food, shelter, company. I hesitated. 3 years in captivity, before the crash, had taught me one thing. Trust is the most dangerous currency. So I refused. I turned my back on them and kept walking. The next morning, the blizzard came, just as they warned. The storm howled like a living beast. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. Snow whipped my face raw. I stumbled through the forest, half blind, until a tree fell and slammed into my shoulder. I collapsed. Through the haze, I saw figures running toward me. Harlan and Dexter. They hadn't left. They dragged me out of the storm and into a cave. They saved my life. That was the moment I realized maybe not all men were monsters. We traveled together after that, sharing food, fire, silence. For the first time in years, I wasn't completely alone. 2 years later, Harlan told me we were close, 10,000 kilometers more. He said with a smile, "And we'll see home." We built a raft to cross a river, but the current turned violent. Harlan slipped, hit his head on a rock, and disappeared under the surface. I didn't think, I just dove. Dexter screamed for me to leave him. but I couldn't. I pulled Harlan to shore, coughing and gasping, barely alive. When I turned back, Dexter was gone, and so was the bag of gold we carried. The next morning, we found him by the water, his pockets heavy with greed. Harlan's eyes turned cold. Without a word, he raised his rifle and ended the betrayal before it could happen again. After that, there were only two of us, but the trust between us had shattered. One day, as we climbed a ridge, I offered to carry Harlan's pack. He looked tired, worn. He misunderstood, thought I wanted his gold. His eyes darkened. Before I could explain, he swung the pack into my chest. I lost balance. The world turned upside down. Then, blackness. When I opened my eyes, I was alone again. The sun was setting. My ribs ached. My leg burned. But I was alive. I crawled until I found a stream. I drank until I felt human again. The water tasted like forgiveness. I didn't hate Harlan. I understood him. Out here, greed and fear become the same thing. Days passed. I walked, limped, crawled, until one morning, through the mist, I saw something that didn't belong in this frozen land. A roof. Smoke rising from chimneys. A village. I fell to my knees, laughing, crying, shaking. People ran toward me, real people. They took me in, fed me, warmed me by the fire. I slept for 2 days straight. When I woke, Mara, one of the villagers, was sitting beside me. She had followed me after I saved her and her child months before, near the frozen ridge. "You gave us hope," she said softly. "You taught us not to give up." I looked out the window. The snow was melting. The world was turning green. For the first time in years, I saw color. We built a small cabin near the river. Me, Mara, and her son. At night, I'd sit by the fire and listen to the world breathe again. Not the silence of death, the silence of peace. One evening, I found something in the melting snow, an old bullet casing, rusted and worn. One of the many I'd used to count my steps. I turned it in my hand and smiled. It wasn't a mark of pain anymore. It was proof that I'd never stopped walking. Years later, travelers passing through the valley sometimes asked about me. The man who walked 4,000 kilometers through the Arctic. I always shook my head and smiled. No, I'd say, I didn't survive alone. Because survival, I learned, isn't about outlasting death. It's about finding something worth living for, even in the emptiest places on Earth. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the wind whispering across the tundra, but it doesn't scare me anymore. Now, it sounds almost like a voice saying, "You made it home." And maybe I finally did.